Hi, I'm Martina. Welcome to my channel Ich werde gesund. This means I will get well. Today I have Rebecca Tolin from the United States. Rebecca has recovered from an CFS. She's a mind-body coach and she also runs the recovery program. I'm really excited about this interview and I'm also a bit nervous because this is my first interview in English and I know that my grammar is a mess and I mix up the words. So please forgive me for that, but I'm sure you will understand Rebecca and that's most important. And yes, before
you
we
sound
start.
fantastic. You sound great. So much better than I would sound in any other language. That's not my native one. So I'm impressed. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I just want to say a few words before we start. I don't want to convince you from anything here, nor do I want to discourage you from anything. I want to share strategies that have helped me so far to improve my condition significantly. And today, Rebecca wants to share her strategies that helped her to recover. But each story with CFS is a bit different and each way out. And all the things we discussed today don't replace talking to your doctor or therapist. And before I forget that, there will be a written summary of this interview in German and English on my website, and I will put the link in the description. So yeah, hi Rebecca, welcome to my channel. I'm really happy to meet you.
I'm so happy to meet you, Martina. I know we've corresponded for quite a while now, and we have so much in common through mind-body healing and journalism and our love of science. So I'm happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, so first I would like to talk a bit about your story with CFS. So I know that CFS often begins abruptly, for example, with a viral infection or another specific event. So maybe you can share a bit how the illness began for you and how it progressed, maybe some of the main symptoms you still remember, and also how long it took to get the diagnosis.
Yes. Okay. Well, my symptoms started after a traumatic event. So I was traveling abroad and I experienced a sexual assault and started feeling really tired after that for about a year and went to doctors who couldn't find anything wrong with me. And interestingly, then I was traveling again around the same time the next year, even though I wasn't feeling well, but I was still able to work in my career as a broadcast journalist. And I went back to Asia, strangely, and that time I got these 3 viruses and then my system completely crashed. I literally couldn't leave my house. It was hard just to walk to the bathroom. I was so weak. Tired and wired all the time. So I suddenly developed insomnia, which I had never had. I was always a deep sleeper. And that was probably the most vexing symptom for 13 to 15 years. Lots of body pain, brain fog. I couldn't even remember the names of colleagues or close friends. Couldn't concentrate or remember much at all. Headaches, anxiety, just all these symptoms that are typically associated with ME/CFS. And I did get that diagnosis pretty quickly. At that point, my mom was taking me to different doctor's appointments because it was hard even to drive. Of course, I couldn't go back to my career as a TV news reporter and went on disability fairly quickly. But I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and ME/CFS. I got lots of other diagnoses as well, fibromyalgia, Epstein-Barr syndrome. Doctors were really honing in on the viruses that they found in my system, Epstein-Barr and a number of others as well that had really high titers. And then there's all those ancillary diagnoses you get, like leaky gut syndrome and candida overgrowth. And I basically went on this odyssey for 13 years trying to get well again. And I saw about 50 practitioners, everyone from medical doctors and specialists like endocrinologists or rheumatologists to acupuncturists and energy healers, as well as therapists. And nothing really moved the needle too much for those 13 years. I became disabled, couldn't work or socialize much. Although over the years, I did gain some ability. I wasn't always completely homebound, but I often was. I would sort of go in cycles. So that's really how it started.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I know a bit about your story, but it's still, wow, this is really a traumatic event. And but thank you very much for sharing this so openly. So from my point of view, this is also a sign of healing this traumatic event, because it's like what Bessel van der Kolk says, or it's feel what you feel and know what you know, but be able to talk about it and to be able to stay in the present. And from my point of view, this applies to you.
Yes, and that's why I include that in my story now, because it actually took years for me to piece together that these symptoms had elements of PTSD and that the trauma was really the trigger for the ME/CFS. And then, of course, the viruses were also stressors. But over the years, I would really come to see that this trauma and also a lifetime pattern of being really hard on myself and pushing myself and some other coping mechanisms were very key in terms of the root causes of what happened to me. And so it is important to acknowledge that. And I also have since learned too that because our brain remembers circumstances that it deems dangerous, I now realize that when I went back to Asia a year later, which was a different country, but the same region of the world where the trauma happened, that my system crashed. It was really overwhelmed by the similarities. It sensed danger because our subconscious mind will take in information in our environment when we're going through a stressful time and associate that with danger and warn us, something's off. But it's not so discerning in terms of the exact circumstances that are threatening or not. So that's why I really mentioned that. And it just took so many years because doctors kept pointing me to physical treatments for physical symptoms. And it makes sense because these symptoms are very physical, completely disabling. But none of those physical treatments ever worked. And even when my viral levels would come down, the symptoms didn't go down. In fact, they generally got worse because the medications were really harsh on my system when I was doing these antiviral IVs. So I really came to realize through all the diets, 40 supplements a day, all these different detoxes and vitamin IVs and therapies that I was doing, that they weren't shifting anything. But I would notice over time that I started a daily meditation and really gentle yoga practice. So it was more like restorative yoga because I couldn't do anything too physical. But I would feel better afterwards, at least mentally and emotionally, and even a little bit physically. And so over the years, I started doing more of that and just more of what gave me a little bit of peace. Also, being in nature seemed to just calm my nervous system down. Being involved with the creative act, like I started writing poetry and reading poetry and reading Eckhart Tolle or Rumi. And I couldn't read a lot of words. So I would just read a little bit and just sit with that and be. And progressively, it just became, I don't know, a kind of, it revealed itself to me that I was beating my head against the wall by trying to pursue all these therapies that were costing several $100,000 over the 13 years, weren't helping. My home was going into foreclosure. It was causing a lot of financial stress. And so I just sort of decided to do more simple things that calm my nervous system. And I still had the symptoms, but I really stopped fighting them. About at year 12. It took a long time because I'm very stubborn and I was a reporter. So I was just trying to, fix myself and cure myself or have someone else fix me or cure me. But that just doesn't work. So eventually I sort of fell into this surrendered state and I felt at peace and I felt very intense symptoms and I would just kind of explore them with my mind. I would start feeling the sensations and becoming curious about them, but I wasn't mentally and emotionally resisting them anymore. And interestingly, from that state, I signed up for an online writing class where we were really expressing our deep emotions, mostly through poetry and some prose. And I met a woman who recovered from ME/CFS and had a conversation with her on the phone. And she explained to me this body of work brought by Dr. John Sarno and Dr. Howard Schubiner. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. But she really explained what was happening in my brain and nervous system. And that when she learned it was her brain and nervous system perpetuating the chronic fatigue syndrome because of these unresolved stressors. And she explained to me, it's not your fault. And these are real symptoms, but this is a process, a physiological process happening in the brain and nervous system that you can recover from. And she said these 4 words that changed my life. And she said, you are not sick. And I just got it in that moment, Martina. I think because she had explained the science and I just said, I am not sick. And in that moment, I stepped into a new paradigm where I didn't see myself as sick. Now, this is not to undermine anyone or any of these symptoms. Of course, you feel sick, but I literally stopped seeing myself as that. And I didn't feel scared of the symptoms anymore. I just knew I could recover. And I had an immediate spontaneous remission. Now it was short-lived, but I jumped off. I started running around the block, even though I had not ran in probably 13 years. It was this feeling of euphoria because I felt like someone explained to me the only thing that made sense. And when something clicks in your mind and you wholeheartedly believe it, your body responds. I mean, it can respond very quickly. So I got this real boost of energy. And then, symptoms did come back because I had what I later understood as learned neural pathways in the brain, like grooves in the brain that have been practicing these symptoms, have been, going down these pathways for many years. But I worked with this branch of mind-body healing then over the next 8, 9, 12 months. And then I made a full recovery.
Wow. This sounds amazing. And I always get goosebumps when I hear those magic moments and those stories. This is really great. So, so I understood it right that that no conventional therapy helped you. So you tried a lot, but these usual things we all try, they didn't help you, right?
Correct.
I mean, medications or psychotherapy or physiotherapy or all the things you can do.
Yeah. Oh, I did. I did physical therapy, chiropractic, acupuncture, medications, supplements, lots of different types of cleanses, therapies, treatments, and they didn't help me. No, they really just didn't move the needle. It was interesting because it wasn't until I had this shift from the inside out, inside myself, that the symptoms shifted. When people were doing things to me, it didn't shift. And I had one very insightful doctor I saw. This was, I think, the one doctor who asked me if anything stressful had happened prior to these symptoms coming on. And that's a reasonable question to ask, right? I had been a healthy world traveler and suddenly I was homebound, and it's amazing how few doctors asked about that. But this doctor had taken a history and he knew that I had experienced this traumatic event where I felt totally powerless. And he actually said to me, Rebecca, I could give you more tinctures or more drugs or supplements, but I have a feeling if I tell you what to do with your body, it's going to reinforce this pattern of you being disempowered, you being out of control with your body because someone's telling you what to do with your body. And that's not going to help you. And so he helped me make that connection to gaining personal agency and self-empowerment is really important when we're healing. Even if you haven't been through a major trauma like I described, most of us do have some traumatic experiences, whether they're small T traumas or big T traumas. And so that shift was really important to pursue things that made me feel optimistic and that even made me feel curious. And of course, when I had that realization with this branch of mind body healing, I was all in. I knew this was the path for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, from all what I have learned so far, this makes sense. Absolutely. And yeah, so maybe you can explain a bit more about this mind body approach you did, and you already mentioned Dr. Sano and Dr. Shubina. I went this pathway too, and it's the same for me. That this is the thing which helps me, and also polyvagal theory. That's the other part. I mean, directly on the nervous system, and the other is more on the brain and on your mind. But yeah, it would be great if you could talk a bit about Dr. Sano's approach and how this helped you.
We're so simpatico, Martina, because I also first realized this sort of top-down approach, the more knowledge and understanding, but then really did need a bottom-up approach, working with the body and the nervous system, and have since studied polyvagal theory and really incorporate that in my courses and my work quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll first describe this body of work from John Sarno, and Howard Schubiner, and then we could talk about polyvagal theory a little later. So Dr. John Sarno was a physician in New York who started realizing that his patients with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, headaches, irritable bowel, and lots of other symptoms weren't getting better with the traditional approaches. And he discovered that it was really this process in the brain and the way brain was experiencing and expressing stress in a physical way that was the mechanism behind many chronic conditions that don't have a pathological cause. So a lot of people got better through Dr. Sarno's work as his patient, and then he wrote these 4 best-selling books, and people report having book cures just from reading his books. Then Dr. Sarno worked with another physician in the States for a short time, Dr. Schubiner, and Dr. Schubiner is really one of the contemporary pioneers in this field, who's brought this similar approach into a wider range of symptoms. So now long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome and a lot of the fatigue-based symptoms we're seeing Dr. Schubner really talks about this is the same process happening in our brain and nervous system. And I started working with his book, Unlearn Your Pain, which was really the best $25 I'd ever spent. Despite the name, he does talk about, lightheadedness and POTS and dizziness and fatigue and a lot of the other things those of us in this community have experienced. And then I contacted Dr. Schubner and I later trained with him, and he really explained to me that Epstein-Barr and all these other viruses do not cause chronic fatigue syndrome. These viruses are actually found in the majority of the population. In fact, over 90% of people have Epstein-Barr and they don't have symptoms. So he really helped me see that I could overcome it using the same approach. And the premise is very much that this trauma or repressed emotions are affecting the way the brain and the nervous system operate. Bessel van der Kolk talks about it as reorganizing the nervous system and the way it's operating. And so we want to understand this knowledge, and the knowledge it's really like getting an accurate diagnosis, because if you think that the cause is viruses or a bad diet, and you're treating those things expecting to get better and not, then clearly that wasn't the cause, right? Because when you treat a root cause, like you put a cast on a broken arm or you take antibiotics for a bacterial infection, you'll start to feel better. So they really explain this knowledge, and that's really important. John Sarno called it knowledge therapy. And I first needed to understand that. And again, it's not saying that all these lab findings aren't real, but it's really saying the brain and the nervous system are the key factors that are regulating all the other systems in the body. And when the brain and the nervous system can calm down, then the digestive system, the endocrine system, and all these other systems are working more optimally as well. So I studied that approach, and that alone helped tremendously. Then I really started working with a meditation that a psychologist named Alan Gordon teaches called somatic tracking. And Alan Gordon wrote The Way Out, which is a great book. And I trained with both him and Dr. Schubner. And so the somatic tracking was actually similar to what I had discovered when I was sick, was I just started tracking these sensations in my body. And really what you're doing is moving from labeling these symptoms as, oh, I have pain, I have fatigue, into feeling them and sensing, well, what is it like? Maybe it's heaviness or dullness or heat or coolness or sharpness. You're just sensing the different qualities. And as you can bring your mind into your body, you are now communicating back to the nervous system that you're picking up on its messages somatically and cognitively. And it doesn't have to keep this danger alarm signal going or this state of flight, fight, freeze going. So I started working a lot with somatic tracking and had incredible experiences where I would be with the pain or fatigue, and it would actually morph into anger or would morph into grief or sadness. And I had some very powerful experiences where I felt like I was interacting with the raw energy of these symptoms, and they were expressing and shifting sometimes as an emotion, and then I would have a release. So I did that quite intensively for about a year, and I still practice somatic tracking every day because it's a way just to tune back into my body and process the day's experiences. That was really significant to me. And then, as you mentioned, I started studying polyvagal theory in the nervous system because for a lot of us who have experienced trauma, we do need to work more with the body, and with the nervous system in these kind of bottom-up approaches.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you very much for explaining that, because this is really so important to understand that. It's really, from my point of view, this is really the key to heal from ME, CFS, or fibromyalgia, or all these mind-body syndromes, that you understand what's going on in your body, in your brain, and in your nervous system, and that this is all interconnected, and that you can really have an impact on how your brain works and how your nervous system works. This is, so I had a similar journey as you. And I also worked through the book from Dr. Stubiner. I bought another version. It's called Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression. And yes, it's not so expensive, but if you want to send it to Europe, then you have to pay $80 for the shipping. But it was absolutely worth it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yes. And I've heard that unlearn your anxiety is similar to unlearn your pain. But obviously more geared towards anxiety, which is the fuel for a lot of these symptoms, right? Our fear of our bodies and our fear of life activities become triggers for the symptoms because of the fear.
Yeah, it was so interesting for me that when I started with all this brain training and work with my brain and my nervous system to change how I think about my symptoms, then suddenly a lot of anxiety came out. and Shubina says, that's a sign for healing, and that's a sign that you're moving into the right direction. That was really helpful because it was the first time in my life that I experienced my anxiety. I held all my life I suppressed my anxiety, and I know under the anxiety there's grief and anger. And so it was really, it's a lot of work to go to the root cause, but it's worth it. Yes.
Yeah. And I know you've been on this deep healing journey and have done so much deep work. And Martina, I had a similar experience that as the fatigue started lifting, I started becoming so anxious. I had all this energy, but it was really anxious energy. And I never had thought of myself as someone with anxiety, and I couldn't believe what was happening. And I was working with a mind-body coach who said, well, just treat it the same way. And, you still just feel it in your body. And that was helpful. But over the years, what I realized working with other clients is the exact same thing was happening to them. It's a very predictable pattern, actually, that as people are coming out of fatigue, they get anxiety much of the time. So that's where the polyvagal theory comes in, because I just have such a hunger for this knowledge and to continually learn, what can help clients and students in my course. And so what I really learned through polyvagal theory explains why this happens. And I can talk a little bit about that if you like.
Yes, please.
Because I know you like Stephen Porges's work as well.
Yeah.
And so, he describes these three main states in the nervous system. And so one of them is the shutdown or collapse state. And that's really at the bottom of the ladder. A ladder is often used as a metaphor for the states of our nervous system. And at the very bottom is this complete shutdown state where the nervous system, so this is happening on an unconscious level. We're not really aware of it. The nervous system is making these decisions unconsciously through neuroception. But it actually perceives life threat. It perceives dangers that are so great it cannot run or it cannot fight them. Now, these can be emotional or mental threats, right? I mean, it can be having a chronic condition that you don't feel you can escape your body. Often these conditions start with a number of life stressors that may have just been too overwhelming to process at the time. So they dysregulate the nervous system. And so when you're in that shutdown state, the most common symptoms are things like fatigue and dullness, weakness, spaciness, brain fog. There's actually less connection and feeling with the body. So there may not be as much pain, but there may be more disassociation. And a lot of the symptoms that we see with ME/CFS and with long COVID. But then as you're able to get this knowledge and get some practices that support you and make you feel safer, or sometimes people just feel safer because their life circumstances change, or for whatever reason, safety is really the cue for the nervous system. That's all it cares about, is keeping you safe and alive. And so when you start to feel safer, and so as for me, it was this body of work, John Sarno called TMS, or Howard Schubiner calls mind-body syndrome. And these practices, and I knew I could recover. I just believed it in my soul. Then I started getting this anxiety. So what was that? That was that I moved up the polyvagal ladder into sympathetic activation. So that's the flight fight state, where now your unconscious brain thinks, oh, I could fight or run from this. That's possible. It doesn't actually feel quite as threatened because you actually have some ability to mobilize. Now, still, flight or fight and feeling anxious is not a fun place to be. So it's not where we want to stay, but it is a sign of progress. And I always say to students and clients, this is great. You're moving up the polyvagal ladder. And what I found with anxiety is just trying to sit still and meditate did not work at all for me because it's like saying, oh, just look the tiger in the face and just tell yourself you're okay. You know, your physiology is primed to run from a threat, and it doesn't really know the difference between an emotional threat or a physical predator like a lion or a tiger. So for me, I found much more vigorous movement. You know, it could be shaking, it could be walking, running, dancing, like really trying to get out that energy and let your system have that release was really helpful. And then I could sit and do more emotional work. And then as you move up the ladder still, then you can move into social engagement, which is a more regulated, balanced state in the nervous system where you can work and socialize and exercise and do the things you want to do. It's not to say everybody who's in social engagement is 100% healthy, but generally our health is much better in that state. And I found being in this regulated state is absolutely pivotal for recovering from ME, CFS, long COVID, fibromyalgia, and other conditions that don't have, a pathological cause. And that's really the difference, is there's really no disease process happening that doctors can point to, right? A lot of the findings are very, very inconclusive. So we want to encourage social engagement as we can, especially when we're anxious, and movement's a good one, but also engaging with other people in a healthy and safe way can make us feel safer, because we actually are social beings, right? We're adapted to move, to be in nature, to interact with others. And we want to try to restore some of those ways of living that humans have thrived in, that we lose so often when we have these chronic conditions and we're feeling so isolated. And sometimes, Martina, that can even be just listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video that you enjoy can be a way to even slightly activate that social engagement.
Yeah, very well explained, Rebecca. Thank you very much. I also think that the combination between those two, these top-down approaches where you work more on a cognitive level, and then this bottom-up approach where you really, it's a bit about more, just feeling, being, and accepting and moving through your body and listening what your body is telling you, and then do the right things. I had exactly the same problem with meditation. I tried to meditate, but it never worked, because I was on such a high alert state that, so I think first you have to release some of this nervous energy, and then you can try to meditate, and then you can shift yourself into more the social engagement system. That's, Oh, thank you very much for sharing this.
Sometimes, yes, I love that we've both come to a lot of similar conclusions. Yes. And mindful movement can be especially helpful where you're aware of your body, whether that's yoga or qigong, but even walking or running where you're just, you're sensing your breath, you're feeling any emotional energy in your body. Some studies have actually found that when you imagine whatever you're upset about, like if there's, someone or something you're upset about, you imagine that while you're in a physical activity. So you might imagine that you're running away from this threat or you're fighting it off. And when you combine that imagination with the physical movement, you can actually really have a full stress release that can discharge some of that survival stress.
That's another great point. And because when you have ME/CFS, especially ME/CFS, it's sometimes difficult to move because you're so exhausted. But there are many ways to move. That's great. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, one of the things I teach is graded exposure, which I learned from Dr. Howard Schubiner, which is where you are imagining an activity that brings on symptoms. And you notice if it does bring on symptoms just from your imagination, that's proof that these symptoms are caused by the brain and nervous system. And then you can continue to imagine it while tracking the sensations in your body and reinforcing through your language that I'm safe and I'm okay, I can do this thing. And then you get to a point where you imagine it with ease and joy. And just from that mind training, then you can start physically doing the activity. And of course, that's what Olympic athletes do and professional athletes do, a lot of mind training. So as you say, even if people are bedbound or homebound, there's really so much we can do with our mind and with our somatic awareness as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I would like to know is, how do you define recovery for yourself?
Oh, what a great question.
Yeah, difficult question.
Ever asked that? It really is. I recently talked with someone who said that she saw the word recovery being distinct from healing. And I really liked the way she described it, as that this resonates with me, that recovery, in some ways, there's a sense that you're trying to recover your old self or how you used to be. But with healing, there's really a deeper transformation happening, and a deeper healing process happening that very well and very likely is going to lead to a different version of yourself, a more authentic version of yourself. And I think in many ways I relate to being healed, although I will also say that I say I've recovered and I'm recovering, because it is an ongoing process. And I'll loop back to that definition, which I'll just try to come up with on the spot because it's such a good question. But, I think that there have been times I felt completely recovered. I mean, after working with the Sarno work, and I just felt I'm completely recovered. But then I've added on a lot of responsibilities. I've challenged myself a lot. I'm teaching big courses. I'm running a business where last year I was working 50 to 60 hours a week, which I don't recommend. And I've corrected that. But a lot of things just happened in my life. And so I did get symptoms back. And, if there's life stressors, I will feel it in my body, but I know how to tune in. First of all, and practice what we're talking about, but also sort of ask, okay, what's my unmet need? And for me, it was spending too much time at the computer and not having more movement and more balance in my life, because I just became so passionate about, sharing this knowledge and helping people. So I would say, recovery and healing are ongoing ways of tuning into myself, my body, the wisdom of the symptoms. I mean, there is a wisdom of these symptoms. Although we can tend to think, our brain and nervous system are malfunctioning, they're really not. They're trying to protect us. Now, they may very well be over inflating the sense of danger, but there often are messages like maybe we're giving our power away to other people in our healing journey or in our relationships. Maybe we need to take more time for joy or creativity or to do what we really want, no matter the state of your health, to find some meaning and some purpose. So I think recovery to me, and healing even more so, is living a full and authentic life. It's accepting my body. It's loving my body. It's also being able to do what I want in this body and mind and in this life and the activities I want. But I think that's secondary, really, to coming into a sense of cohesive harmony with my mind and my body in this moment and accepting myself as I am. And interestingly, that really calms the nervous system. And generally, I feel much more able-bodied when I prioritize that.
Oh, this is such a great explanation. I love that, and it totally resonates with me. Great, thank you.
Oh, good, because it's such a provocative and thoughtful question I really have never answered, and I'll be thinking about this more.
Yeah, I usually ask this question because I ask this question myself right now because I've come so far on my recovery journey, but I still experience symptoms, and I still experience bad days, and I still have to process emotions and things like that. And sometimes I think, I think this is an ongoing process, but where can you say, okay, now everything is okay or not? So yeah, that's why I'm interested in this question.
Yeah. A lot of it does have to do with acceptance, and also whatever our personal goals are in what you want to be able to do in your life. I think it is important to continually imagine that, and move and step into that. But while also finding acceptance and compassion with where we are, because there's always a richness wherever we are. I mean, now that I'm so busy and I love what I'm doing, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And of course, I don't want to feel sick again. And I would never wish that me or anyone would go through that. But, sometimes I miss the big stretches of quiet and days where I could just, be more meditative or look at the leaves on the trees or read books or whatever. So not to undermine the suffering people are going through. Of course I'm not, but there is a sort of a richness in each stage and each season if we look for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at the beginning, I mentioned that you're a mind-body coach, a well-educated mind-body coach from my perspective, and that you also run a recovery program. And I believe it will start soon in April. And it would be great if you could share a bit about the content of the program and your approach, how you work with people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I started coaching. I actually really didn't start doing any coaching till I took several years of training, because even though I had recovered, I really wanted to understand the science and the practices and gain a bigger toolkit. And then I started working with people one-on-one, and a lot of people were getting better. And not everybody does, but they were learning and growing and healing on different levels. And it's really meaningful doing the one-on-one work. But I always felt like I really want to be able to share more of the knowledge and the practices, sort of more breadth, and just give people a download. And a one-on-one session is not really so suited for that. I'm not going to whip out my PowerPoint presentation in a client session. It's more about just being and listening and feeling. And that's really important too. But I couldn't see all the people coming to me for coaching and all the people that wanted coaching. Also, a lot of people don't have the funds for coaching. And I just saw there was so much more potential to kind of download all that I had learned from years of healing, training, and working with clients. So I created this online program called Be Your Own Medicine. And it's actually a live program. I teach it live, but it's also online as well. And people join from around the world. And it's been really remarkable what recoveries people have experienced in this course. And I think part of it is because there's so much knowledge. There's so many different practices for different kinds of people. There's about 20 somatic meditations, but there's also about 30 handouts and Some of them have writing exercises, so you can sort of choose your pathway, what works for you to get in touch with emotions and stresses. There's lots of different practices to calm your nervous system. There's some breath work, humming, different sounding that we can make to calm our nervous system. And what's been really interesting is the power of a group to tap into collective healing and community. So although people are joining from around the world, and some join the live Zoom calls and some watch the recordings later, we have this private online community with myself and 3 other mind-body coaches answering questions and encouraging people. And many people have said, I felt alone for, 5 or 10 or 20 years. I felt like no one understood my symptoms. And now there's this whole community of people who understand and are really lifting themselves up. So that online community where people are sharing in a written way became a real source of healing for a lot of people. And that was powerful because I feel we all are teachers. We all are healers. We all have our own wisdom. And when we can share that we create a safe container and there is a certain framework, so much more healing and growing and learning is possible than often, what we can just do alone when we're sort of isolated. So I'm so excited about Be Your Own Medicine. I've just poured everything into this. I've actually created and recreated it over the past couple of years. And we actually start March 30th. The welcome module opens, but registration will be open until April 4th because our first live class is April 6th. So if anyone feels called in terms of this approach, mind-body healing, whether you have some knowledge, but you just feel stuck or you don't have this particular approach, it's thorough, but it's also gentle. And a lot of people tell me they like that. They don't want something super rigid that they have to do an hour a day, no matter what, because that can actually create more stress. So I take this approach to learn to tune into your body and your nervous system and what it's communicating in terms of your own practice schedule throughout the course and really just throughout your life.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you very much for explaining this. It sounds really great to me. And of course, I will put the link to the course in the description and in the written summary of this interview, that people who are interested in your course can find it. And yeah, I encourage people to take part in this course because I think your work is really great, and I'm sure that you do everything perfectly.
I'm still a recovering perfectionist, that's for sure.
I think this is a lifelong journey with this perfectionism. We all have that.
Yes.
Yeah. You're also a co-author of a study at Harvard University, and they investigated whether a mind-body approach could help people with long COVID improve their symptoms or their overall condition. And I looked into the study. It has been published as a preprint already. And I found the results very promising. And if you like, it would be great if you could just say just some words about this study and maybe your role in it and some of the main outcomes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I love that you found the preprint study because it's not being widely distributed yet, but it is out, as you say, published in preprint. And the lead investigator has submitted it to a scientific journal for a peer review and is going through that process. But I felt very honored to be invited into the study to speak to the patients. And so this was a small pilot study. It was using the mind-body approach we've been discussing. In fact, one of the textbooks was Unlearn Your Pain by Howard Schuppener. So it was very much using that approach. And there was 23 people enrolled in this study, and they all had significant long COVID symptoms for a period of months, on average about 9 months. None of them had any tissue damage. So we're really talking about a subset of long COVID patients who don't have heart or lung damage as a result of a severe case of COVID. At this point, that's probably the case, though, for most people with long COVID, that they didn't have lung or heart damage. So of these 23 people, the results were quite impressive. The study was 13 weeks, and really the first 4 weeks were this psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy is what it's called. But that's very similar to the approach Howard Schubner and John Sarno talked about. And then the last 8 weeks were mindfulness-based stress reduction. Now, MBSR has not been shown to significantly shift symptoms by itself, but combined with the knowledge and the practices of emotional expression, knowledge therapy, desensitizing triggers through graded exposure, and some of the other elements in the first month of this study, the MBSR, the mindfulness, can be helpful in calming down the nervous system. So in this 13-week study, I can read a few of the results that people had on average. These are outcome values from 0 to 13 weeks. So the somatic symptoms went down 60%. Brain fog went down 67%. Fatigue decreased 44%. The highest decrease actually is interesting. Shortness of breath decreased 80%. The physical function limitations decreased 54%. Any kind of GI symptom decreased 50%. And then anxiety over pain went down 74%. Pain interference, so meaning how much pain interferes with your life, went down 77%. So these were impressive results. And Dr. Donino, who's the lead researcher and a professor at Harvard Medical Center and a physician in Boston, said it's really rare to see these kind of results. He's done other clinical trials with medications, and you don't get these kinds of results. Now, it's difficult to fund a study like this, a large-scale, double-blind clinical study. So I think he's hoping to raise money. But right now, these early results are really promising.
Yeah, absolutely. It is incredible. And it's so important that there are some first studies about these mind-body approaches. We know that Dr. Schubiner does some studies as well. And this is so important, because then you can you see that it's backed up by science and that it's no woo-woo, these mind-body things. Yeah.
The research is so important. And Dr. Donino has done a large double-blind clinical study with back pain. And he actually has quite impressive results with that, where I think it was about 74% of the people with chronic low back pain improved to the point where they had no pain, 0 out of 10, or only 1 out of 10 within his study. And frankly, he realized during the back pain study that many of those people were presenting with long COVID symptoms, and they were also getting better from these similar interventions. And so that's why he started studying long COVID. And I agree, it's needed. And because these symptoms without a clear physical cause have the root cause in the brain and the nervous system, doing this work can improve such a range of symptoms. It's quite incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then my last question is, do you have maybe a positive message for people listening or watching, or maybe a first step people can do who are really at the beginning of their journey?
Yes, I do. I want to say that keep moving towards what gives you a little bit of hope, a little bit of optimism, curiosity, a little bit of relief. That is your healing path. So doing things that other people tell you you have to do, that you begrudgingly do, whether that's a certain diet or taking 30 supplements. If you don't want to do it and you don't intuitively feel it's good for you, it's probably not going to help you. A, because your intuition's not calling you there, and B, because it may be making you feel unsafe and disempowered to do something with your body that you don't want. So it's really important to find what lights you up, what gives you hope. And to know, Martina, as you said, there's so much that we can do with our thoughts, with our emotions, and with our behaviors that really impact our brain, our nervous system, and our health, and our whole way of experiencing our life. So keep moving towards that. And I think in terms of how to start, well, there's so many different ways. And of course, it depends what you're drawn to. But just bringing some attention into your emotions on a daily basis can be helpful, because those get really left out in this healing journey. We're just fixated on our physical body, and we're just being treated like we are a body. But how can you actually turn that around to say, yes, I have this pain, I have this fatigue, this is real, but how does it make me feel emotionally? What is my underlying emotional state? I'm frustrated, I'm hopeless, I'm angry, and really start naming that. There's actually studies that show, just by naming your emotional state, this always amazes me, by saying, I'm angry. So instead of, just talking about the symptoms or whatever it is, I'm angry right now, it actually turns down the activity in the amygdala. It's so interesting. I think it has to do with the fact that we're listening to these signals, we're acknowledging our emotional self, and then the signals don't have to be amplified so high in a physical way. So I think that's important to start tuning into, what do I enjoy? If you have fatigue, what gives me more energy, right? What gives me more energy, and follow that, and then tune into your emotional state as well, and try to honor that along with whatever else you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for these great words, Rebecca. And thank you for your time, and thank you for this great interview. It was a pleasure.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you, Martina. And thanks for all you do as well.